This is WOBC Oberlin 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. My name is Peter Cummings, and this is Oberlin, the show I do because, well, I live here, but I don't work here, so it's hard to keep up sometimes on everything that's going on. And my guests today are Oberlin City Manager Eric Norenberg, and Sal, I'll let you introduce yourself here because A, I'm struggling with your last name, but B, also your title. I'm sorry.
Okay. Good afternoon, Pete. Sal Tallarico. I'm the Finance Director for the city.
Okay. Let's see if we can swing that mic over there between the two of you a little bit better. All right. The topic today is taxes. That's fun for everybody, right? But it's important for everybody because there's an income tax on the May 6th ballot that's coming up this week, and we want to know why we should vote for it, or if people have opinions, maybe they don't believe they should vote for it. Hopefully we can answer some questions for them today about that. We will be taking calls. The request line, which we will rename the question line, is 440-775-8139. I've used that one other time this semester, and some people, maybe if they didn't dial the area code, I think had better success. But we'll give it everything we've got. I've got plenty of questions to work with in my head, and there were some others, Eric, that you had shown me that I guess had built up over recent weeks and months from different public presentations?
Yes, that's correct, Peter. We've done several public presentations over the past few weeks, and we've also had an email line open for people to email us about the levy. So we've been taking questions, and I've been keeping track and posting them on our website.
All right. And what is the URL for that FAQ?
Well, if you go to our city website, www.cityofoberlin.com, on the left side of the screen, you'll see 2014 levy. Just click there, and you can read about the facts about Issue 22, and then you'll find a link for the FAQs on that same page. And I think we have about 26 questions from the public that we've answered.
All right. Let's start with some basics. What is the levy that we're talking about? Is it, I believe, 0.6 mils?
It's a Issue 22, as you mentioned. It is a 6/10 income tax levy. So the rate in Oberlin would go from 1.9% to 2.5%, and it would generate about $1.8 million. It would help support the general fund, which is what we refer to as the quality of life fund of the city. So it supports police and fire protection, it supports parks, the cemetery, recreation, planning and zoning, law enforcement through the prosecutor's office, and building code enforcement and general administrative offices.
Okay. $1.8 million is what it would generate. In some of the reading that I've done, what I understand is cuts from Columbus in recent years have amounted to, or put the city in a position where you're $1.2 million in the hole. Is that right? I mean, you can't operate in the red. You're not doing that. But
correct.
Is that the amount that you're trying to make up, and this is going to give you a little extra?
Well, what we have lost is 42% of our local government fund. And I'll give you a little bit of background on the local government fund. It's been in place since the 1930s, and what that is the state income tax and the sales tax that is paid here from the local economy and Lorain County goes to the state, goes to Columbus, and then some of those funds are returned back to us through the local government fund. And not just cities, it's returned to the city, villages, libraries, and school districts. What the state legislature did is they reduced that by almost half, and it was about 3 or 4 years ago when they had about an $8 billion shortfall in the state's budget. This is one of the sources of revenues that they use to balance their budget. And unfortunately, that came at a time when we're still struggling from the recession. And in addition, the state legislature also eliminated the estate tax. And fan of the estate tax, they eliminated the estate tax without replacing it at all with another source of revenue.
Now, the estate tax was never for any city, and I've dealt with almost a dozen cities on the west side in my daytime job, if you will, that receive this. So from one year to the next, it's not a reliable amount. How did you ever budget in the first place for the amount that you thought you might get, and what would have been your philosophy? Were you depending on a certain amount, or if it came in, then that was just all that much better?
Well, that's a great question. Over the last 4 years, we've averaged about $700,000 in estate tax. It's been, in the last 15 years, it's probably been as high as $1.2 million and as low as about $200,000. And had we not had the estate tax over the last several years, there would have been 3 or 4 years where we actually would have used some of our reserves, same as this year where we're potentially using $1.2 million of our reserves. Had we not had the estate tax in those years, we would have used reserves to make up the difference. But because the estate tax came in at a healthy amount, we didn't have to do that.
Okay. So the fiscal year we're talking about is 2014. You operate on a January through December fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay. And in that budget, you're already predicting that you'll need to use $1.2 million. That's budgeted.
Correct. $1.2 million of our reserves or savings,
right.
However you want to refer to it.
Out of how much in that savings or reserve account?
About $9 million.
Okay. And there's a general good practice that auditors will say cities should maintain X amount in that fund to be available for a rainy day. Am I wrong? Is there an amount that if you had your way, you'd have so much in that?
The general guideline for a minimum amount is about 25%, but
25% of what? I'm sorry.
Of your total general fund budget.
Okay.
So, but that wouldn't carry us much farther than maybe 3 months out of the year. So, that's truly, in my opinion, a minimum.
Okay.
That any city should keep. There are some cities that keep 5%, 20%, 50%. It all varies, but in my opinion, 25% should be looked at as a minimum, not as a standard.
Okay. And before using anything this year, you've got about $9 million in there, you said?
Correct.
Okay. And what percent is that of your general fund budget?
About 100%.
Oh, so you have, some people would say you've got some money to give there.
Well, you could say that some people might say we have money to give, but I'll get to the other point that we're struggling with, and that's the interest income. In 2008, we were generating about $800,000 or so in interest. Today, it's less than $200,000 in interest. And part of it is because we've had healthy reserves, and we've been able to invest those reserves and use the earnings to offset a need for additional taxes. So yes, we could spend down the reserves, but what we've been trying to explain is that once the reserves are gone, they're gone. They're one-time money. It's not like it's going to be back in the budget next year. Once those reserves are depleted, they're gone. And not only is it's going to be a struggle to replenish those reserves, we also lose that potential source of revenue when the interest rates turn around.
And I jumped down a long hole there, and we've kind of gone off from the income tax that's being that is on the ballot for Tuesday. 0.6 of a mil would generate 1.8 million. What would the average person pay who's subject to this tax, and who is subject to this tax?
Well, the millage is typically referred to on property taxes, and this is an income tax. So we'll talk about a percentage. It's a 0.6% on income, and it is typically on earned income. So it does not affect seniors that are on a fixed income. It does not tax Social Security. It does not tax retirement benefits. It is just on typically on wages. Earned income is what is taxed.
Okay.
And it would cost about $300 a year for someone making $50,000 a year.
And what is the average resident or worker in Oberlin make? Is there either of you happen to know that?
I have aggregate figures in total payroll, but I do not have by individual that number.
I just wondered if 50,000 was the average person in Oberlin. And this is for people who work here. Or is this for people who live here and work somewhere else? How does that happen? You guys go through RETA, right? Mm-hmm. So there's maybe some interplay there too?
That's a great question, Peter. The city municipal income tax is based on where you work. Mm-hmm. School district, state income, and federal income, it's where you live. But municipal income tax is based on where you work. So folks coming into town, working here, and then going back to their home community will be paying the tax.
Okay.
And as well as residents who are working in Oberlin or have a job outside of Oberlin where the tax rate is less than the current 1.9 and the proposed 2.5%.
Well, now explain that second part again. So if I live here, which I happen to, and I work somewhere else, which I happen to, and I work in Avon Lake, where they have whatever income tax they've got. I don't have that off the top of my head. But then there's some difference that I'm responsible for here. Am I hearing that correctly?
That's correct. Currently, if you work in another community that's, let's say, a 1.5% community, we'll look at Amherst. So if you live in Oberlin and you work in Amherst, your employer is withholding 1.5% for Amherst city taxes. But then you pay the difference between the 1.9 and the 1.5 to Oberlin.
Okay. And you guys depend on RETA to be the interface to handle all the movement of the dollars and cents in that regard.
Right. RETA is set up as a council of governments. So it's the members that select the representative board that run RETA. It's not a private company or a private collection agency. It's a combination of many public entities. And they do collect for the city of Oberlin. They do not collect for the city of Amherst. City Amherst collects for itself.
Oh, okay.
So, but the employer will withhold in Amherst. They'll pay that to the city of Amherst, and then when you file your city income tax through RETA here in Oberlin, you'll pay the difference between the 1.9 and the 1.5%. We give 100% credit for any taxes paid to any other community, and we'll continue to give 100% credit for all taxes paid elsewhere. Some communities in Lorain County do not give 100% credit, but City of Oberlin still does.
Okay, and the current tax rate, income tax?
In Oberlin's 1.9%.
Okay, and then with the 0.6 would be 2.5.
Correct.
Okay, does that put Oberlin at the top, middle, bottom?
That's another great question. We keep getting some. There's some misconceptions out there that we've been trying to correct, and that is that if you look at the tax rates in Lorain County, you'd say that Oberlin is the third highest at 1.9, with Sheffield being at 2 and Lorain being at 2.5. But when you consider what we just talked about, the credits, the credit allowed and the maximum credit, there are actually 9 other communities that are higher. And the example we're using is if somebody lives in any of the communities in Lorain County but works in a city that has a 1.75% rate, and let's use Elyria as an example. So if you live in Amherst and you work in Elyria, so Amherst's rate is 1.5%, Elyria is 1 3/4. Although Amherst gives 100% credit, their maximum credit is limited to 1%. So somebody living in Amherst, working in Elyria, actually pays 2.25% in total municipal income tax, part to Elyria, part to Amherst. So that's why I mentioned earlier that although it seems like we're the third highest, because we give 100% credit to our full 1.9%, we actually currently have 9 other communities in Lorain County that are higher than us, if the example that I just gave you.
Okay. This is WOBC Oberlin 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. My name is Peter Cummings, and you're listening to Oberlin, the show that I do every week because I want to know what's going on in town. I live here, but I don't work here, so I bring in guests to catch me up on things like taxes, which is what we're talking about today, because if you haven't already voted, Tuesday's the day to go down and vote, and some of you may have already voted. The phone number here to call with questions or comments is 440-775-8139. We can give it a shot, folks. Call in if you want. But otherwise, I've got Oberlin City Manager Eric Nornberg and Sal, it's Tarico, and your title again is?
Sal Tallarico, Finance Director.
Yes, Finance Director. Okay. It's one of the hardships of not getting to spend time in town and covering those 10 cities on the west side. I could tell you Avon Lake, Sheffield Lake, and all the rest up there, but I can't name the people who run the town that I live in sometimes. So thank you both for taking the time to come up. I'm very grateful for that. Eric, I wanted to ask you, the levy that is being asked, the 0.6, 0.6%, is going to bring in $1.8 million, which is $600,000 more than your shortfall this year. Is that by design? I have to believe. Are you looking forward with that to try to keep additional money for use somewhere, or why go with an amount that would exceed the amount you're short this year?
Well, Peter, one of the things that we've been doing over the past few years is transferring some of the money from the Capital Improvement Fund into the general fund to pay for operations. So by doing that, we've been shortchanging some of our operations and maintenance, such as street repair and other things like that we think would be very important for the long-term strength of our city and preserving our assets. But because we've been having this shortfall since the legislature made those cuts, we've been moving money from the Capital Improvement Fund, and by passing this levy, we'll be able to reverse that and put that money back into capital improvements, and we think that will be a great benefit.
How much have you taken out of that fund to cover your needs? I mean, if you're going to bring in $600,000 extra, does that in and of itself in a year bring you back up, or how many years have you been drawing down that fund for keeping the safety forces and the rest where they are?
Well, we've moved a little bit, $100,000 or $200,000 now. This year, $250,000 from the Capital Improvement Fund over several years. So what it means is that's one street that we could have repaved or made some improvements on. And so when you look at that transfer, when you look at the lost interest income, when you look at the lost funding from the state with the estate tax and the LGF, it actually totals more than what we're asking for in terms of this levy. So what we're hoping is if the economy improves over the next few years, when we get to the point that other parts of our income tax levy are poised for renewal, that we may be in a position, Sal and myself, to recommend to council that we don't renew one of those other levies. So we think this puts us in good shape for the next few years. But by the time 2018 or 2019, when a couple of our income tax levies that are 0.2% are ready to be renewed, we might be in a position to be able to say, we're going to let the tax rate go back down again. Okay,
so we've got 5 or 6 years, well, maybe only 4 or 5 till those two come off, and it's a 0.2 and what was the other one?
The combination of our income taxes, the 1.9 right now is made up of a 1% levy, a 0.5% levy, and 2.2%. And so when those are coming due, the the 1% is ongoing, but those 0.2s, for example, those need voter approval to be renewed. So at that time in 2018 and 19, one or the other of those will be coming due, and we may be able to forego renewal.
Okay.
And we'd like to be in a position of being able to lower taxes in the future.
Okay. So did I hear you right? Are there things that the city has not done in terms of projects, street or otherwise, that you would have done because of some of these budget shortfalls?
That's correct. There's quite a few things that we're not doing right now, both operationally and in terms of capital projects. We've been trying to constrain our budget to tighten our belts as lots of families do and lots of cities do when times are tight. We've left positions be vacant when people have retired or left.
Like how many? And over what period of time?
Over the past 3 or 4 years, we have positions that are vacant in recreation, in our general maintenance division that takes care of streets and other sorts of general repairs for public works. We had a vacancy in my office that we only filled with a half-time position, for example. There are, I think there's a vacancy or two in the court. So it's kind of across the board. It's hard to count up because a couple of those positions we filled with a half-time, part-time position with no benefits and that sort of thing. And so, we've been doing a lot of things to try and trim expenses where we can and operate more efficiently.
Well, you bring up a good point. I'm sure there are naysayers out there who would speak directly to that, saying, well, if you're operating more efficiently now, why, if you brought in more income tax, would you want to return to what it was previously? You're operating more efficiently now. Isn't that better?
In some respects, yes, that's better. But I think some people would also say that where we've cut services and cut expenses, we've sacrificed some quality. I know there are people who were frustrated last summer when maintenance in our parks and cemetery was not up to usual standards. Mm-hmm. And that's because we were short-staffed and we mowed less frequently. And people were concerned about that. So I think while efficiency and trying to be as frugal as we can has merit, it also means that in some cases we've sacrificed quality. So I believe if we pass this levy on Tuesday, myself and all of the department heads and Sal will meet with the city council in the fall when we prepare our budgets, mm-hmm. and we'll talk about where do we increase spending if we can. Do we replace some of those vacant positions so that we can return some of the quality services in 2015? But we won't be going on a wild spending spree by any means. We're going to do this very carefully and deliberately.
Well, sure. And do you have a preliminary list, even if it's just in your collective minds, about where some of those additions might best be made?
Peter, we're actually looking at not making any additions because...
and I'm sorry, let me rephrase. Rather than additions, maybe I should have said filling positions that had been left vacant. But I mean adding back some things that had been taken out.
Operationally, I'll leave that to Eric in a moment, but the only area that I think that we would add back is into our GMD, Streets and Parks and Rec, and that sort of area where we've seen our biggest cuts in personnel. But what we're trying to get back to is that as Eric mentioned, we are operating more efficiently. Our employees have also taken 3 years without raises. They're taking on a bigger share of the health care in addition to not having any raises for 3 years. And what we're trying to do, even with all of that, the efficiency, the no raises, more of the health care on the employee's shoulders, we're still looking at a $1.2 million deficit this year. And that is, when I say deficit, that's using $1.2 million of our reserves.
Sure.
And that number only will continue to grow as inflation grows. So that reserve, although I mentioned it's $9 million, it's not like it's going to last us 7 years. It's going to last us much less if we rely simply on the reserves. So we're trying to not have to cut any further our services rather than trying to replace any that we've lost through efficiency and through attrition.
Okay. This is WOBC Oberlin 9 and Oberlin College and Community Radio. We're going to take a moment for a public service announcement. We'll be right back.
Do you know your reproductive rights? Students United for Reproductive Freedoms, or SURF, is an organization dedicated to educating the Oberlin community about the state of reproductive rights in Ohio. To find out more, join our group on Facebook, or come to our open meetings every Tuesday evening at 9 p.m. in Wilder 215. You can also contact us at oberlin05031414. The fight for reproductive rights in Ohio is not over.
This message was brought to you by WOBC, Oberlin College and Community Freeform Radio.
Like they said, Oberlin College and Community Radio. Sal was just nice enough to hand me his business card, and I tell you, in the print environment, I have these all over my office and have the benefit of getting to look at them and look at them and look at them, and then when I go to write or to edit, I have looked at them so much that I know them and I have them memorized. So I add this to my file for Oberlin reference in the future, Sal, and I'm grateful for your time and expertise in coming up here. Eric, you too, you guys on a nice day like this could have probably chosen a dozen different things to be doing rather than sitting up in a radio station studio talking about taxes, but here we are, right? So thank you both again for taking the time. The common thread in a lot of tax askings is the dreaded list of services, people, what have you, that might be cut if the tax isn't passed. Is there a list that you guys have? And honestly, in these cases, I think that at least in the school board situations I've dealt with, I think they must just have one that's standard and is in the bottom of their top left drawer of their desk when they go to do another property tax. Is there a list of people, services, or otherwise that you guys have drafted?
In terms of what will happen if the levy doesn't pass, which I think is what you're asking,
it is.
We have not drafted a list like that. In my past experience working for other cities in a situation like this, when lists like that get prepared, it is a big morale killer for the organization. If somebody looks at a list and says, hey, that's my job, that's my title, it's on that list, it's bad for morale. But what I would say is that of that general fund budget that Sal talked about earlier, 75% of that is cost related to employees, and that includes salaries, benefits, all of the expenses that go into having people on payroll, workers' comp, those sorts of things. And so if we don't pass a levy and we don't come up with a solution for our shortfall, we are going to have to cut employees. We are going to have to cut services. And up to this point, when we've worked with the city council and talked about our budget situation over the past 3 to 4 years, we have not had people from the community or from the council say, we can do away with that operation, or we can cut half of this department or that. I think we have employees that are highly valued by our community, and our city council has great confidence in our employees and appreciate the services we provide. So I think that's why the council put this levy on the ballot. But if it fails, I think we're going to have a long conversation with the community and really say, okay, what do you think we can really do without? What would you sacrifice in terms of the quality of safety services, quality of parks and recreation, and other things in our community? I hope we don't get in that situation.
I believe it's Sheffield Lake that is in the position of trying a third time on Tuesday for an income tax increase. Their city being at the point where if it doesn't pass, and if one more firefighter retires, they will have to discontinue the fire department as a city-run entity up there, and they've tried for 18 months now to get one passed. So you've had how many meetings in the community, and where I'm going with that is, It does seem, though, like a question you would get repeatedly. Well, how can I make a decision if I want to support this if you can't tell me what's going to happen if it doesn't pass? Maybe people looking for some of those specifics. What kind of feedback have you gotten?
I think we've heard a lot of support from people we've talked to in the community. We have had a lot of very good questions. People have asked questions that I think indicate that we need to continue to do a better job of educating our residents, because sometimes this budget stuff can be very confusing. It's not like we have one big checking account and everything comes out of that same pot of money. So we get questions that indicate that people need to know more about how our budget works. For instance, one of the questions that came up recently had to do with, well, why are we buying expensive new garbage and recycling trucks at a time when our budget seems to be in a difficult situation, and that's why we're asking for this tax increase. Well, they're two completely separate funds, and operations like our utilities, our water, wastewater, electric, and then the refuse and recycling operation are paid for through user fees. So it's based on how much of those services and utilities you consume. So those kind of things are not part of the general fund. So again, when we talk about general fund, it's quality of life kinds of services that we've outlined before. So once people understand and have a chance to dialogue, I think they feel pretty comfortable, at least the people who have been in the meetings that we've talked to. And we've had an open invitation to email questions to our via our city website at levy@cityofoberlin.com. Anybody can email a question about the levy. We've had one emailed question in the past 6 weeks. So either we're doing a good job of getting the word out, or people don't have a lot of questions at this point, or maybe they're listening right now and they're going to think of a few questions and call or email between now and Election Day.
Well, some big part of me hopes that they're listening right now. It's the part of me that is thinking about going on with this show over the summer and the fall. Okay, so the turnout has been high or low at what kinds of meetings? Where have you had them? How many?
Let's see. We've had a few presentations at church groups, in front of the League of Women Voters. We've met with employees. We've met with people in our business community in the industrial park. We meet about every other month or quarterly with the businesses in the industrial park, and we had a very well-attended group of business people there for a forum. We were up at Kendall. So we've had anywhere from 15 or 20 people up to a room full of about 40 or 50 people.
Okay. If you want to call in, you can at 440-775-8139. I'm happy to take questions from anyone who might be listening about this. This is a six-tenths of what? This is a six-tenths, Sal?
0.6% income tax.
Increase.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So it's interesting, Eric, that you mentioned the industrial park and talking to businesses out there, because I'm curious if a tax like this affects them in the way that they do business. Where a property tax or other taxes might leave a business wondering, well, is this where I want to do business? Is an income tax the same kind of thing? Does it have bearing on their operations?
It's hard to speculate on that, but what I think it's important for everybody to realize, whether you live here or work here, and you're paying the income tax, it's going to services that are really beneficial, regardless of whether you live here or just come here for your job every day. Again, we keep saying the same things over and over again, but it's things like police, fire, quality, well-maintained infrastructure, getting the snow plowed during the winter. That comes out of this fund. So if you're working in the industrial park and want to get to work safely and want 911 to answer and send a paramedic if you need that, this tax helps pay for that. So,
but you don't get the sense that it's a disincentive for people doing business in the community?
Well, when I moved here about 6.5 years ago, one of the questions that was asked was not how much is the income tax going to be, and should I live somewhere else, or what happens if I live across the road in the township. I didn't ask those kind of questions. I don't know about when you moved back here, Peter, whether you raised a question about, well, should I live in this community or that community based on income tax. I just don't hear that about how they make those decisions. But I don't know. Maybe Sal does.
Peter, one thing that most people aren't aware of, because it's happened over the last 10 years, is the state income tax has dropped considerably, about 30%. And so the highest rate was about a little over 7%, and now it's a little over 5%. And the state legislature would like to decrease that even further. So that's 2%, and we're talking about 0.6 of an increase. Now, 0.6 is for most people, it's a large increase. But when you consider over time, over the last 10 years, how state income taxes have dropped, even with the additional 0.6 income tax that the city is proposing, it will still be total, when you combine the state and the city taxes together, it'll still be less than what we were paying in 2004 for combined taxes. And what the state has done by decreasing state income taxes is they found themselves, as I mentioned earlier, in a hole, and they had to balance their budget. And unfortunately, they've balanced that budget on the shoulders of local government, and all they've done is shifted the taxing burden onto our shoulders. They increased the sales tax last year. They amended some of the property tax rollbacks, how those are affected. And they decreased the income tax, but they did not replenish the local government fund, and they did not replenish the source of revenues that we were getting from the estate tax. And again, clearly, this is just shifting the tax burden onto local governments. And you see the services that we provide from your local government, where the higher you go, the less of the services you see. And although sometimes you think that people seem to complain a lot more about local taxes, whether it's school district, city, or county, it's because they can get our ear. And that's a good thing. The problem is that you can't really you don't have much input in when the state decides to increase the sales tax like they did last year. How much input do we all have in that? The state legislature just does it unilaterally. They don't ask for our opinion. They don't ask for a ballot issue on it. They just do it. Where here, nearly every tax that we have or fee is voted on by the residents. Okay.
All right. Well, in the course of the hour so far, we've tried to illustrate, you've tried to illustrate how operating expenses are different from, say, infrastructure expenses, things that this money can and can't be used for. But let me ask a different way. Is there another income source that goes the same direction as the income tax to fund the remaining 25? Well, is there anything besides income tax that funds operations of the police department and the fire department? I mean, there are grants surely throughout, but is there any other income stream that could be considered for increase, or are there other income streams out there that the city could look at to help offset an income tax need?
That's a great question, Peter. Over the last year and a half, City Council has asked those same kind of questions, and Eric and I prepared a kind of like a shopping list of here are the potential sources of revenues that we can use to try to help make up the shortfall that we have. And the income tax is the largest source of revenue for the general fund by far, and some of the others, like property tax. The reason we didn't pursue, or council decided not to pursue, a property tax is because it would take, in order to make up the same kind of dollars that we're looking for from the 0.6 income tax, it would take 16 mills to make up that kind of shortfall. And so 16 mills, for someone with a house of $100,000 appraised value, that would cost $560 a year. And now, one of the big reasons is, of course, that one mill only generates $113,000. And most people say, well, that seems low. Well, the large part of our well, not a large part, but 47% of our property in Oberlin is tax exempt. When you add the college, the FAA, the schools, the city, the library, the post office, and all the churches, that's a sizable part of our property tax that's exempt. So
47%. That was the number.
47%. Correct.
Okay.
So that was one of the areas we looked at, was property taxes. We looked at fees. We looked at increasing recreation fees. Council didn't want to go there because we wanted to make sure that recreation was affordable and available to all the youth in town. So there aren't any other significant sources of revenues that could make up what we lost as a result of what the state did over the last few years.
Okay. I've wondered about that particular percentage for a few months now, 47%. Okay. And 16 mils that's a really high number there to consider for property tax increases. Yeah. This is WOBC, Oberlin 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. Anyone out there listening who wants to can call at 440-775-8139. These two gentlemen have been very nice to come up today and spend their time talking to me about the ballot on Tuesday, the tax increase for Oberlin, people working in Oberlin. We can field some calls if you want to give it a try. The story yesterday out of the Chronicle that I saw, the Chronicle Telegram, was about the idea of the tax on the ballot in the first place. Now, I understand that you guys probably can't offer a lot in the way of detailed comment right now, but just to see where you might be able to go, is there a question in your minds right now that this will remain on the ballot for Tuesday?
I think we're both confident that the law director made the correct decision, and there was some confusion at the point of the night of the vote, but the law director reviewed and made sure that the vote was legal and in accordance with the charter, and we think there's no validity to the challenge.
Okay, and the challenge is at the County Board of Elections, is that right?
Well, I believe questions have been raised. I'm not sure how formal the inquiry is, or whether there is any formal inquiry. I think it was, questions were asked, and at this point, because the law director has ruled, I don't know that there's anything else that will happen after this.
Well, and in fact, that was part of what I had read, that as a charter city, the judgment about the legality of the process rests with the city. And so if your legal counsel has determined that, I think that actually may be where it ends right now. Okay. All right. Well, so then you've got this on Tuesday's ballot, and do you have a place that you as city administrators go to watch the returns? I mean, there might be some elections where you're not really that interested, or it's not that big a deal. How big a deal is this? Are you going to gather together and see how it all comes out?
Well, Peter, years ago when the only place to get those returns was like in some like Election Central or something like that, people would gather together and nervously await the returns. I think now that it's available online and you can be almost anywhere with a smartphone and an internet connection or whatever, I think I'll be home comfortably waiting the returns and probably folding laundry or something like that.
Maybe tweeting about it when they come out.
Could be.
Okay. All right. If there was the misconception that frustrated you the most about the income tax and what that money is used for, what would either or both of you say that is? I like to make people think there. I see that.
Well, the main misconception that we've been trying to address was the one I mentioned earlier about how some folks think that Oberlin's income tax rate is already one of the highest in the county, and when you take into consideration the credits, we're actually not. There are actually 9 other communities that will be higher or currently higher. Even with the levy, if the new levy gets approved, there will still be 3 other communities that will have a rate as high or higher than the city of Oberlin, again, based on those credits and maximum credits allowed by each community. And I think also there's some folks out there, and God bless Oberlin, that are retired that would love to pay the tax. Every time we have a tax levy on the ballot, someone asks me that question. And unfortunately, the state law allow us to tax retired income, whether it's Social Security or pension benefits. And here's another aspect of the city income tax. Although the state constitution allows for home rule, there are certain instances where the state has ultimate authority, and local income taxes is one of them. If they all decided tomorrow to repeal the income tax statewide for municipalities, they could do it. They certainly wouldn't anytime soon, because they know what a source of the key source of revenue it is for local governments, but they can. So they do also set restrictions on what can and can't be taxed, and certain other rules that we have to all comply. Anyone that has an income tax has to comply by, and that's one of them. So we seem to always get that question anytime there's a levy on the ballot, is I'm retired, how can I pay the tax? I want to participate. And unfortunately, there isn't any mechanism within the law to do that right now, other than making a donation of some sort to the city.
Okay.
One of the other things that people ask about, and I think is important to consider, is the fact that we, because this is an income tax and we are taxing people based on the employment in the community, every now and then we get questions from people about, well, can't you bring more jobs into town? I remember that Quebecor or Johnson Controls closed, and can't you attract more jobs? Well, I think we're doing a pretty good job at trying to bring more jobs into the industrial park and into the community, and our local economy, I think, is in pretty good shape.
Do you have some numbers that you can throw out, jobs that have been brought in recently?
I don't have exact figures, but the building that the World Color or Quebecor was in a few years ago when they closed, that building is now that has been sold, and the new owner has moved lots of production into that building. I think at this point we have one building in the industrial park that is vacant, and some office suites in that Quebecor building. So buildings that have been vacated have been refilled. We have a very strong downtown. I don't think there's any first floor vacancies in downtown right now. But when people talk about trying to grow our way out of this, I agree, and we are working on trying to attract new jobs, but more importantly, we're trying to help retain and expand our current companies and their workforce, and help them be more productive. And there's several things that we're doing on that, but a good example is Synapse Biomedical. A few years ago, there were just a few jobs there. They're at, I think, in the 20s right now. They're scheduled to add another 10 or 12 over the next few years. So they've been growing, and I think that's an example of where the city's been supportive and helpful, along with our regional economic development partners. But if somebody asks the question, well, can't we just attract another company? It's not that simple. If we were to bring in an a company with a $5 million payroll, and they were taxed at the same 1.9% that we're paying right now, that would only generate $95,000 in additional income in the income tax for the city. So it's not that easy. We'd have to really attract lots of jobs, and we'd probably really have a hard time finding enough room in our industrial park and community to put all of those jobs. But what is important is that we help continue to grow the economy, make this a quality of community that people want to come bring their jobs and to raise their families, because we have people moving into Oberlin right now to work, to educate their kids in the public schools. So it's really a team effort. But I think that's been very important, and that's helping keep the local economy strong.
Okay. It's some kind of elephant in the room. The 47% of the property that's not taxed in the city. In my mind, that's the way I'm thinking about it, because I wouldn't know any other cities around, and maybe you do, that face that kind of a percentage of property that they can't access for taxable purposes. I with 10 minutes and 175 years of history for the town or whatever, we can't get to how that all evolved to the point where it is today. But in forward looking, that to me remains a very interesting issue financially, surely, for you guys at the city. But the interplay between the college, the financial interplay, the service interplay between the college and the city, when it comes to things like this, it would be worth a whole summer's worth of shows, I'm sure, to try and talk that out. And should there be someone listening from the college, who knows, maybe I'll try giving you a call to see if you'd be interested. But here you're in the position that you're in, and to balance the budget, to prevent further cuts, and to add back some money to funds that you have been taking from in recent years, you're asking for a 0.6% increase in the income tax on Tuesday's ballot. It's issue 22. And it will get you through this year. How many years would it be for? Is this a 10-year tax increase? What are we looking at for its duration?
Yes, it's a 10-year levy.
A 10-year levy. And it would be then the furthest one out that would come for renewal. You have some in 2018, 19, and then should this one pass, it would be in 24.
That's correct. And Peter, one of the things that we'd like to do, and I'll mention it again, Eric mentioned it earlier, and that is that if whether the taxes or some other source of revenue is identified between now and when the other 2/10 levies expire in 2018 and 19, we're going to do everything we can to try to let either one or both of those levies expire. Certainly we can't guarantee anything, because we don't know what else the state government is going to do or what else the economy is going to do. But that's going to be our goal, to try to at least try to aggressively let those levies expire if they can. Now, I'll take one example, and that is that if interest rates rebound to just the 2008 level, that's about a $600,000 increase in revenue for the general fund. If that were to happen, that's enough to let one of those 2/10 income taxes expire. Now, we think that interest rates will start to climb next year, and because we ladder our investments, that will take a couple of years. Well, even if the rates start to increase, it won't happen overnight. The Federal Reserve has talked about doing that slowly, and that's the responsible way to do that. So that may take yet another year, and now we're talking mid-2016. And with laddering investments, you're talking about maybe another year or two before we see those dollars actually in our coffers that actually can be spent on the city's operations. So therefore, we'll be looking right at the time when one of those levies might be expiring. So the timing for making a good decision on whether or not to let one of those lapse is good, on at least on the interest piece of our revenue that we've lost. The local government fund, I don't think the state legislature has any plans to replace those dollars, and even more remotely is the state legislature's option of trying to replace the inheritance tax that we've lost.
Are income taxes at all the same as property taxes in the way that they decrease over the years as, say, the number of properties that are taxed go up? That would be the case with the property tax. Is there a rollback at all that happens with income tax? And then a follow-up, do you guys have the ability to pull a tax off prior to or adjust it in any way prior to 2018?
I'm going to answer the latter first. And we did look at whether or not council could reduce the income tax without a vote of the people, and we couldn't find any legal mechanism to do that. So there is a way to do that, but we'd have to put it back on the ballot. And certainly, if we put a reduction on the ballot, and other communities have done that, it isn't
probably one of the most popular votes that are ever taken. Right?
That's correct. I would suspect that it would pass. So council can do it, but it would require a vote of the people. And then when you mentioned about the rollbacks, properties have rollbacks that have been given by the state for many decades. I'll call it a discount because that's what it turns out to be. So you see your property tax bill, and then the rollbacks are next, and those are discounts. And if you're elderly, you get the homestead deduction as well.
Right.
Well, what the state did as of last year, they eliminated the rollbacks, those discounts which amount to 12.5% if you live in your own home. 12.5%. Any new levies that are approved going forward will no longer have that 12.5% discount, and that's another way that they're funding their continued reduction in state income tax.
But that's strictly on property tax.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. On income tax, there is no such thing as a rollback. It's a straight percentage of your earnings, and that's a characteristic of municipal income taxes all over the state of Ohio. And that's another piece that's governed by the state legislature. We have some latitude in what we can do with our local municipal tax, but the key areas are governed by the state legislature.
Okay. Well, in wrapping up, have we missed any items that either of you gentlemen would wanted to have mentioned?
I don't know that we've missed any, other than trying to reinforce that the general fund is what the dollars that we're asking for are going to support. And general fund, in our view, is all about quality of life. Provides services by people that work for the city to make Oberlin the great community that it is. And we've been able to manage to this point, but we can't manage any further without looking at some significant reductions in those services and the quality of life that we experience here in Oberlin.
All right. Eric?
I guess the last thing that I would say, Peter, is to reinforce one of our core values at the city is integrity and stewardship of our financial resources and our environmental resources. And I think I can speak for Sal and say that we have employees that are dedicated to doing a quality job and to working hard and being the best they can for the residents of Oberlin. And so, we're going to take good care of these dollars if the voters entrust them to us, and I think they'll see the results and be very confident that we're going to do a good job. And we are always responsive. If somebody has a question or concern, they can always contact either of us at City Hall. Our email addresses are on the website. So, we're going to take good care of those tax dollars if it's approved on Tuesday.
All right. Well, Sal Tallarico, Finance Director for the City of Oberlin, and Eric Nornberg, Oberlin City Manager. Thanks again to you both. I still see some sunshine out there, so if you did have plans or needs to get outside into the yard or wherever, I think maybe you'll still have some good weather left, but I do appreciate both of you gentlemen taking the time to come up on a Saturday afternoon and talk to me. We've got the next DJ in the studio now. You're listening to 91.5 WOBC Oberlin College and Community Radio, that is. My name is Peter Cummings, and this is the show that I do because I want to find out what's going on in town. If I find out that I've got another show next week, and I'm not quite sure when the station shuts down for this semester, you can listen to me next week at 5 o'clock. Otherwise, we'll transition through a public service announcement to the next show starting at 6. Have a good week, everybody.
The Recycled Products Co-op welcomes you to our office during office hours every week in Wilder Room 327. We are open from 7 to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday.